All right, Solo, a Star Wars story. It is our 11th out of 12 sessions. No one's ever done this before. I'm still super stoked about doing this. I don't think people, I don't know, maybe people have done like 3 sessions on Star Wars movies and Judaism, maybe, but we've hit double digits, and next week will be the 12th session, so I'm really excited for that. So we got Solo Star Wars story, and here we go into the source. Okay. All right. So it's our 11th session of biblical and rabbinic texts, how they relate to the 12, as of coronavirus, the 12 theatrically released films. And all right. So the first thing I came up with was consequences. When Lady Proxima, still on Corellia, said to Han, he doesn't even have Solo yet, just Han, I trusted you with a simple task, and all I'm hearing is more excuses. There must be consequences for disobedience, or else you'll never learn. Okay, there must be consequences. So one of the fascinating things about the book of Deuteronomy is it's filled with consequences, and it's either you do good, you get rewarded in a physical, material sense. You do bad, you don't trust me, or you don't trust God, because these are Moses' addresses, right? These are Moshe Rabbeinu addressing the Jewish people. You don't heed God's word, bad stuff will happen to you. You won't have the good material goods, all that stuff. Of course, we have in the second paragraph of the Shema, we have from Deuteronomy 11. I think many people are familiar with it. I'm not going to go into it. If you're not familiar with it, it was published hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. It's Deuteronomy 11. This is not a spoiler. So it's there. You can read it. Basically, good stuff. You do good, good stuff. Bad, bad stuff. And this is certainly repeated quite noticeably also in chapter 28, but much more expansively than in the 11th chapter, where if you, and also, by the way, it's also, of course, literarily close, because it starts off with Vahaya im Shemoah and Vahaya im Shemoah. It's very similar here, Tishma and Tishma'u, but it's basically the same. The idea is the same, that when you listen, obviously you're going to listen, but then, so that's the good stuff. And then here in the latter part of the chapter, if you don't, well, guess what? You're not going to get all the goodies, and actually bad stuff's going to happen to you. So the idea is, and these aren't the only examples in the book of Deuteronomy, but the book of Deuteronomy, like with Moshe giving his final exhortations, his final addresses, just do good. Doing bad will have negative consequences for you. Pretty simple and straightforward. Of course, if you want to talk about theodicy, good things happening to bad people and bad things happening to good people, and how Deuteronomy works out only in a perfect situation when good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. But when it's the opposite, it can be confusing. Basically, the biblical answer, the biblical response to that is the book of Job, where it's basically you don't really know actually what's going on. We can't really get into the divine mind and know everything that's going on, but at least for thinking about what Lady Proxima has to say about consequences, here's some good stuff from the book of Deuteronomy. Okay, hitting back, Han Solo, and this is responding to, does someone have something? Stevie?
Yeah, just that both the Star Wars quote and the Shema also have an idea that consequences are connected to education.
Oh, good call. I like that connection.
Yeah.
There's an educational component. It's good. Awesome. Okay, so hitting back. So we have Han Solo in the same conversation with Lady Proxima says, I said, next time somebody hits me, I hit them back. So it's funny because when I think in sort of religious texts, sort of broadly speaking, there is, and Stephanie, you probably are quite aware of this, is in the Gospels about turning the other cheek from Jesus, right? So that's in that tradition, but not in ours. We do have Proverbs 24:29 here, which is, don't say I will do to him what he did to me. and I'm going to give back to the guy. Basically, the Book of Proverbs advises against trying to just hit back. Then again, Book of Proverbs often gives nice statements, but not necessarily things that people are, in normal life necessarily going to follow, right? So I think the sort of the assumption is, yeah, in most situations people would hit back, but Proverbs is saying, you know what, better to not. Don't, because you could escalate the situation and can just get worse. But it happens, right? It happens in both biblical stuff, right? It talks about, there's the instance of if two people are fighting and one of them accidentally hits a pregnant lady. I could have said pregnant person, be really politically correct. I'm just going to call her a lady. So a pregnant lady, and somehow she has a miscarriage, and da-da-da-da-da. But basically the general assumption is that people fight, there's usually a tit for tat, and then happens. Comments, questions, queries? Good? Awesome. All right, adding a name. So at the port, I guess we'll call it, at the port in Karelia, Han's trying to get out. He sees the imperial officer. He asks him, "What's your name, son?" "Han." "On what?" "Who are your people?" "I don't have people. I'm alone." "Han Solo?" "Approved." And then, good luck, Han Solo. So he just, on a whim, gets this extra name. It's interesting in thinking about name change. We have in the Babylonian Talmud and Rosh Hashanah, we have Rabbi Yitzchak, who I think is a late 3rd century, maybe early 4th century Amorad rabbi. And he said there are 4 things, Arba Devarim Makrin Gezer Dino Shel Adam. So a person's sentence is torn up on account of 4 things. These are charity, crying out, a change of name, and a change of deeds. So as far as change of name, it actually quotes in the book of Genesis that Sarai's name gets changed to Sarah. And it's interesting, it only mentions here because Avram gets his name changed to Avraham, but he's not used. It's only Sarai is used as the proof text and not Avram. But either way, we could also talk about, it's interesting because both Avram and Sarai have their names changed. And also we see that, so those are the primary ones, but they don't necessarily get a name added on, but we'll leave it for them. All right, so that was as far as changing name. Bringing peace and tranquility. So we have, it's on Nimba, whatever that planet is called, where the battle is taking place, where Han Solo initially meets Beckett and his crew. And so Han Solo asks his officer, "Just wondering what our objective is, Lieutenant." Bring peace and prosperity to the galaxy, install a regime loyal to the Emperor, and eradicate the hostiles. It's their planet. We're the hostiles. You got a problem, trooper? No problem, sir. So, Han's obviously, pointed up a huge issue with the sort of like who the hostiles are. But the notion of bringing prosperity to a certain area kind of reminds me of in the book of Exodus when God says, you should go to the land of Canaan. I will send a plague ahead of you. The plague will drive out before you the Hivites, Canaanites, the Hittites. I'll drive them out little by little until you've increased and possessed the land. I will not drive them out before you in a single year, lest the land become desolate and the wild beasts multiply to your herd. So basically, sure, we could just wipe them out, but then it'd be kind of craziness. So let's do it slowly, a slow conquering, so there can be basically peace and tranquility, whether it's from maybe not necessarily from the native human inhabitants, but certainly to some degree from the fauna inhabitants. Okay? Doing good? Awesome. All right. Also on the topic of names, we have nicknames. So what's your name anyway? Growling Chewbacca. All right. Well, you're going to need a nickname because I ain't saying that every time. So I think we've talked about nicknames before. And there's we have various things in the Talmud. We have this selection from Megillah 28a from the Babylonian Talmud of Rabbi Zera, who lived in the late 3rd century. And one of the things that he said that he did that was a good thing was, I never called my fellow by his derogatory nickname, or maybe just the nickname, even that's not derogatory. So, and yet we have Rabbi Yossi, who lived in the 4th century of the, the late 2nd century. And Rabbi Yossi said, in all my days I did not call my wife, nor my ox, rather my wife, my home, my ox, my field. So he did have nicknames, loving nicknames. And so you could have nicknames, especially for basically a companion. And I think that tracks better with the Chewbacca thing, right? Especially since Chewbacca was originally conceptualized before A New Hope as basically a dog, a companion for Han Solo. But even just if we want to think of them as kind of friends or partners to some degree, even though Chewbacca technically has a life debt that he's serving to Han Solo, but basically it's cool in sort of the tradition of Rabbi Yossi. We also have Babylonian Talmud, Bava Metzia 58b, that we have these different things about not calling different names, yada, yada. There's another discussion that complicates it, but the basic thing is nicknames can sometimes be bad, sometimes can be gray, sometimes can be good. And I think sort of off of the Rabbi Yossi model, that's kind of how Han Solo's addressing Chewie. All right. So we have Beckett says, I still got some debts to pay before I can head back to Gleansum and get into the Valley Court. Now, for those who know what happens at the end of the movie, after he, spoiler alert, gets shot by Han Solo, and he says, I still was going to go to Gleansum and learn the Valley Court, right? Still wanted to do that. Really, I think this really pithy statement from Pirkei Avot, we have Hillel, the great early 1st century sage, saying, don't say, when I shall have leisure, I shall study, because maybe you won't have leisure. Maybe you won't have that freedom, that space and time to be able to do the study that you want to do, that you've got to make time for it. And that's what happens with Beckett, right? He says, I'm going to have free time. I can go and do, and then he gets killed. Sad. All right. We good so far? Any thoughts? Okay, so this section from the movie could have gone a million different directions. So we have between Kira and Han, and Kira says when they meet on Beckett's ship, what should we drink to? Han says, let's drink 2 and see where it goes, right? What should we drink to? Let's just drink 2. Now, there's probably a bunch of good drinking things in rabbinic literature. I'm just really fascinated by this following text that we're going to see. It's in the Babylonian Talmud. It is an early rabbinic text probably from the 2nd century of the Common Era, and it's taught Kos echad yafe leisha. 1 cup of wine is good for a woman. 2, it's not looking good for her. 3, she's just going to start asking. She's going to ask, like literally asking for it. 4, she will solicit even a donkey in the marketplace and doesn't care. So this is pretty crazy. Of course, actually, wait, one little adjustment. So then we have Rava, who's this 4th century sage, also probably he's I think arguably the most famous of all Amoraim, the rabbis of the Talmud. And he says this was only taught if her husband is not with her. But if her husband's with her, that's fine. She can have 4 cups, whatever. So it's interesting also thinking about the 4 cups of wine of the Seder night, where but of course, I think there's something to be said, 4 cups of wine with food and 4 cups without food, and maybe spacing of time and all that stuff. But something to think about. It's also, I'm really fascinated because of I don't know if people know, I also have this Jewish drinking stuff, which I'm really fascinated by and looking at different texts, and that's how I stumbled upon this particular text but thinking specifically about drinking and how it's differently gendered in rabbinic literature. And I really haven't found that many texts. I've only found one other one, but there's probably still a whole bunch that I haven't yet come across. Thoughts, comments, questions, queries, concerns so far? Guys, hands. All right, great. Move on. Gambling. I think we've talked about gambling before. This is a nice little, of course, there's gambling in this. We got Han, Lando. Lando meets Han, calls him Han, corrects him Han, and of course he keeps calling him Han later on, which is a really great retcon for when they meet in the Empire Strikes Back. He calls him Han. Good old retconning. So we've talked about this before, but basically gambling is an issue that the rabbinic sages are find to be morally okay and yet not okay for them to serve as either witnesses or judges. And the reasoning being that they are okay with potentially losing stuff, right? And that's certainly the case here, right? They can lose even a Millennium Falcon. I mean, a huge ship like that, they could even lose, which is, I mean, they're playing some significant stakes there. This is not something we've dealt with, which is luck or luckiness. And Han says, looks like you're having this, I think this is while they're gambling. Looks like you're having a good day. I'm a lucky guy. So there's the statement, it was stated, and it has these two mid-3rd century rabbis, Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Yochanan, and it was said, Rabbi Hanina says, a constellation makes one wise and a constellation makes one wealthy, and there is a constellation or there is luck for the Jewish people. And Rabbi Yochanan says, there is no constellation for the Jewish people. And also, this constellation in Hebrew is mazal, which is basically luck. So the idea is there some sort of luck, some constellation that somehow the Jewish people are connected to? And two clearly opposing pieces to that. Yes, there is mazal, there is some sort of luck or constellation for the Jewish people, which is Rabbi Hanina's position. Rabbi Yochanan says, nope, doesn't exist. And so Rabbi Yochanan, the Talmud says, actually Rabbi Yochanan follows his own reasoning, as Rabbi Yochanan said, whence is it that there is no consolation for the Jewish people? As it is stated, thus said the Lord, learn not the ways of the nations and be not dismayed at the signs of heavens, for the nations are dismayed at them, and the nations will be dismayed by them, but not the Jewish people. And then it actually goes back the Talmud then says, wait a second, even in the generation before Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Yochanan, Rav, who was the greatest sage of the first of that generation, opines that there is no consolation for the Jewish people. As Rabbi Huda said, Rav said, whence is it that there is no consolation or there is no luck for the Jewish people? As it is stated, he brought him outside. Look now toward heaven and count the stars, if you are able to count them. And he said unto him, so shall your offspring be. So the sages derive from this that Abraham said before the Holy One, blessed be he, Master of the universe, behold, you have given me no offspring, and one born in my house is to be my heir. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, no, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, this man should not be heir, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But basically, it's very clear that this could go into separate directions, that there is some sort of luck or constellation connection for the Jewish people, which is Rabbi Hanina's position. And then his colleague, Rabbi Yochanan, said, nope. And he even has some backup from Rav in the previous generation. So it's clearly something that's discussed. I'm not sure. I mean, this definitely wants to bend more towards, there's not necessarily this constellation aspect of luck for the Jewish people, but there's a direction that could also say, actually, there's what to be said for it. Cool. Awesome. This isn't the greatest thing. It's something, but if anybody has anything else that pops up in their mind, let me know. So Han says to Beckett, Beckett says to Han, assume everyone will betray you and you will never be disappointed. Han says, sounds like a lonely way to live. Beckett says it's the only way. So I don't have a really clear thing about everyone betraying you and never being disappointed. But as far as trusting someone, we had Hill earlier on from Pirkei Avot. I'm quoting from the same chapter, a different statement of his, which is, one of the things he says is, do not trust in yourself until the day of your death. So I think there's something to be said that you would assume at least you could trust yourself. Maybe you could trust some family members, some friends potentially, you know, and then sort of work outward as far as levels of trust. But he says, don't even trust in yourself, meaning there's a certain the way I read Hillel's statement here is to say there's a certain sense of distrust for everybody. If you can't even trust yourself, how could you even trust anybody else? Now, as far as to the level of betrayal, that's something different, but certainly not really fully trusting in yourself. And what he means by that is like, you know, does that mean you shouldn't have self-confidence? No. What he means is, don't just assume that you'll always do the right thing. You never know. You could do something, and that's really not the best self of you, basically.
Wait, can I say something
Yes,
about that?
go
I
ahead.
actually feel like I read this statement from Hill as totally being the opposite of what Beckett is saying, actually, right? Not don't even trust in yourself, but you have to trust in other people and not yourself, right? In the context, because it's like, don't separate yourself from the community, don't trust in yourself, don't judge other people until you're in their place, right? It's like the community needs to be there to support you, that you're not trusting only in yourself. Whereas like, it's like the total opposite of like what Beckett says to Han, of like, don't trust other people at all.
Don't trust only in yourself, you're saying?
Yeah, because it's especially coming on the heels of don't separate yourself from the community. Because like, don't trust yourself going along with don't separate from the community seems to me to be don't separate yourself in the community and only try to be only by yourself.
That's clever. I like that reading. That's a good reading. I think it can work also. So, I mean, maybe I'm being a little drushy of like, don't even trust you. It's like obvious that like you would at least trust yourself, trust your friends and family, and then trust other people, right? And here Hill is saying, don't even trust yourself, which is admittedly a little bit of a drush. I like yours because it's especially the way it's sandwiched, right, between community and friend, right? So there's certainly an interpersonal connectivity, you know, sort of thing going on. It could be, I mean, I wouldn't say that he says, don't trust anybody. I don't know. I just thought it was certainly something about interpersonal trust, but here it's like inner person trust. I know it's not the most convincing, but it's something that's there. And, but as far as assuming everyone will betray you, I just thought this was such a fascinating opposite direction thing. But Vera, what you're really advocating is also like, don't separate this from everybody else, from the community, because you trust only in yourself. Maybe that's not even sufficient, right? It's kind of like the like if you're only about yourself, but also like, but if you're not even for yourself, then like, what good does that do, right? Like you got to at least be for you, but not only for yourself, sort of thing. Cool. All right.
I wonder
Stephanie?
if he's also saying like, oh, he's saying don't trust in yourself is because a lot of times people who are really cocky believe that they believe in themselves so much because they can't, in their mind, they can't be wrong. So like it doesn't really tie in with what Beckett says, which I've only seen Solo once, so I didn't remember that, but I find that funny because that's actually kind of how I look at people. But we'll let that aside for the moment. With Hillel, I almost feel like it's a admonishment to not be so cocky that you're so sure in yourself that you should be listening to other people as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. To think about other people. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Alrighty. Manumission. So we have here the context of the movie is L3, right? L3E7. She first starts by, you know, freeing one of the droids, removing restraining bolts, and says, "Go do this to all the other ones, and I don't know, just free all yourselves." And like, it's so flippantly said and like clearly without, it's really just to spread chaos, but it does have the ultimate effect, not only of freeing these slave droids, which aren't really people, but it also has a side effect of also freeing all these Wookiees, right? And I think there are also various humans involved in this manumission. So manumission is just really just a fancy word for slave freeing. And so in the Torah, in the Bible, there is when someone has a Hebrew slave, an Eved Ivri, so this is from Exodus, so they're going to work for you for 6 years, and in the 7th they go out, unless they want to stay on, and then they stay on le'olam for a long time. Now, technically that means forever. We'll see how it doesn't really, how the rabbis differently understood it. Okay, so then in the book of Deuteronomy, very similar thing. 6 years they're going to work for you. 7th they go free. If they say no, I'm happy where I am, I don't want to leave you, then again they hang on olam forever. Except we have the Jubilee year in Leviticus, and basically everybody gets to go free, and because of this, and the Jubilee is every 50th year, this freedom. So the sages said, what do you mean? We just said these slaves who are there till the 7th year and could go and they want to stay forever, but yet everybody's freed after the 50th year. So they make this nice, they do this good hermeneutic, and they basically say, well, except for every 50 years, because olam could also mean 50 years, and it's great, okay. But that's the basic idea, that there is still this freeing, and there's no, and even like someone supposed to remain an Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave forever, still, even they themselves get manumitted after 50 years, or up until the Jubilee year, which could be literally 3 years later, but, or whenever it is, just in that slave's slave cycle. Okay. Marauders. There are probably some other good, so we have the statement, they're marauders, they don't care about anybody, all they know how to do is kill. There's probably other, I have this, which I will read, but there are probably other, in rabbinic literature, there are various things that are discussed about highwaymen or bandits of various sorts. This is like an interesting little cute little story, which I just think is fun. But like I said, there are probably some better ones that are more representative people have. So this is Babylonian Talmud, Brachot 60b. Rabbi Akiva was walking along the road and came to a certain city. He inquired about lodging, and they did not give him that. So he said, everything that God does, he does for the best. He went and slept in a field and had with him a rooster, a donkey, and a candle. A gust of wind came and extinguished the candle. A cat came and ate the rooster. A lion came and ate the donkey. He said, everything that God does, he does for the best. That night, an army came and took the city into captivity. He said to them, didn't I tell you everything that God does, he does for the best? So now, whether it's like literally an army or maybe who knows, and who knows about this captivity? Was it really just captivity? Was it something more? Was it a bunch of bandits that came, and who knows what they would have done with the inhabitants and their belongings? But this does happen, and certainly the rabbis have a concern, even when they're just on the highway, of how they behave. There's a story of Rabbi Tarfon about knowing that it's time for him to say the Shema, and he just, he's like, well, I wanted to be careful about them. So there's certainly a concern about highwaymen, bandits, and the dangers inherent with them. Okay, so this next one's a little interesting. So this is again
on that one too.
What, Daryl?
I was just gonna say real quick on that one too, that
yeah,
the Marauders have a greater purpose that isn't really clear at the beginning. Obviously, it doesn't unfold exactly like how that story unfolds, where it's better for the person. But definitely still like, hey, there is definitely a reasoning and a bigger sort of like, almost like it's like a ripple effect. Like there's these little things and it causes these ripples and it leads to this outcome you didn't expect that's actually good for you. Well, same thing of the ripples with what happens with the Marauders, and at the end, and then that funds the rebellion and everything. So
Right. Yeah. It's definitely interesting. It's one of those things that like, which I'll just use the Star Wars phrase from a certain point of view, right? The way that we see Enfys Nest and her crew for the bulk of the movie, that they're literally just marauders and they're dangerous and they're just there to cause chaos, you know, from a certain point of view. But then you have the perspective shift, and oh wait, Enfys Nest and her fellow marauders are actually for the good side, as it were. Yeah, it's a good twist, and for the best, as Daryl points out. Okay, cutting out tongues. So we have when they returned demanding their tribute, the people shouted. And this is again Enfys Nest telling the story. I mean, it's basically of Crimson Dawn. When the people shouted back in one voice, "No more!" the mercenaries did not like the sound of that, so they cut off the tongue of every last man, woman, and child. Very brutal. The closest thing I could really find about this, unless someone has a closer thing that they know of, is in Proverbs, the 10th chapter of Proverbs. The mouth of the righteous produces wisdom, but the treacherous tongue shall be cut off. I think this is, I'm just going to say this. I think in Proverbs, it's more proverbial, metaphorical, not literal, not like Crimson Dawn actually cutting the tongues off of people. But if we want to talk about tongues being cut off, it's a text. It's in the Bible, okay? Even as obscure as it is, it's there. Okay. All right. So, and as part of Enfys Nest's description of Crimson Dawn, she continues on and says, "Do you know what that pack of animals became? Tell them. Crimson Dawn and the rest of the 5 syndicates have committed unspeakable crimes across the galaxy." So we have an Exodus. And by the way, it's great because at this point in the movie, we don't know who's the head of Crimson Dawn and who's part of these 5 syndicates. Crimson Dawn is just repeatedly mentioned throughout the movie. We have some really early statements of Beckett and Han talking and just dropping the name Crimson Dawn, and like, we really don't know anything about Crimson Dawn. Anyways, and then we get this, what the sort of awfulness of Crimson Dawn made me think was about the nation of Amalek in the Bible, mostly the Torah, but I have a little extra stuff here. So Book of Exodus, Amalek came and fought with Israel, defeating. Moses said, okay, you're going to fight, yada, yada, yada. Okay, great. They have this war. But then they're not gone, because by the time of Saul, we have here in chapter 30, I did 30 and then 15, that's silly. Okay, I'm sorry. But we have in 1 Samuel 32, they had taken the woman captive, lowborn, highborn. They didn't kill any, but carried them off and went their way. And then we have in the 15th chapter, okay, they fought and captured King Agag, put them all to death. Okay, but basically they're awful people. It's the way they're perceived. I don't know. They're sort of like Amalek is like the arch enemy of the Jewish people. We don't really know their origin story, but they're just somehow like more than just a little thorn in the side of the Jewish people. They're bad. They're there. But that's kind of what makes me think about the awfulness, even though there is another thing I didn't include, but elsewhere in the Bible, that somehow Amalek took sort of like the weakest parts of the Bnei Israel, of the Israelites, and that's what they attacked. And so that's sort of a despicable aspect of them, and sort of them also attacking the women and children, kind of like what Crimson Dawn had done. So that's the connection to Enfys Nest's statement. Okay, so towards the end of the movie, we get this super duper exciting Maul appearance, which, like I said, that is just, this movie doesn't really do much, but like literally the Maul appearance is the highlight for me. It's really exciting. And just as a side note, I don't know if anybody, on my Star Wars website, I have a mall exploration series that has over 30 posts. And so like, I don't think there are many other sort of like mall experts out there who have a series of like 36 posts on mall. But so they had this discussion, and she said, so Maul asks her, where is the coaxium? And Kira says, gone. Beckett took it. Slaughter the others. I alone survived. And Maul says, one man couldn't have done this alone. She says, I wasn't there, but if I had been, perhaps I could have saved him. So obviously she is lying through her teeth. She was there. She killed him. I know we've talked about lying before in the series. Of course, we have Exodus, keep far from a false charge. It's interesting because, and normally I talk about other texts with lying, this famous Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai thing. How do you talk to a bride? How do you tell it like it is? Do you lie? Obviously, Kira is trying to save her life here, right? Like, and she's not bending the truth. She's like, this is like, she literally killed Beckett. That's not bending the truth. That's just straight up lying. But she's saying she's trying to save her life, and she also expected Beckett to have taken it, right? She knew Han took it, but it's possible when she spoke to Maul that actually that Beckett could have gotten it from Han, especially with his experience, right? Han's the young sort of rookie, and of course Kira also knows Han and that he's actually pretty quick, and he may be young, but he was a little what's it called, not a swamp rat, but a little whatever those rats are called in that movie. But anyways, there's something to be said for lying to literally save your skin, right? If Kira tells him the truth, actually, this guy that you've never heard of walked off with the coaxium. I single-handedly, with my own hand, killed your man. I killed him, right? That was me. But instead of admitting to treachery and backstabbing, she claims that actually she's loyal to Maul and the Crimson Dawn. So that's some stuff from Solo. It's a Star Wars story. There's probably some other stuff in there, but yeah. Thoughts, questions, comments, queries? Are there things that you thought I should have added that I didn't have in there?
I don't think so. I mean, it's
Yeah.
For a Star Wars movie, it's a fairly linear plot. Lots of Star Wars movies have sometimes things going on in multiple locations, or they're going at least to lots of places and doing things. And obviously they do go to different locations, but it's a very kind of straightforward thing. And so there's like I think there's some good themes in there, but yeah, there's just not quite as much to toss about, not as many different things to talk about.
Right. And I was struggling with this one because it reminded me almost like of Star Wars, the Clone Wars movie, as far as how much or little content there was to discuss, right? With Last Jedi, with really all the trilogy movies, there's plenty, but with Star Wars, the Clone Wars, there really wasn't a whole lot. This actually surprisingly had maybe a touch more than the Clone Wars movie, but yeah. Anybody else? Stevie?
I've only seen it
Or
once,
Stephanie.
so I'm not sure if there could be more, but I think this one is just more of a, hey, here's a fun way to see how we got Han who he is, and throw some Lando in there, because who doesn't love Lando? And young Chewie, like, who doesn't like Chewie? So it was
Right.
this was more the, hey, this is the after party, everybody show up.
Right. Well, it's funny you say Chewie's young because he tells his age in the movie, which is 190 years old.
Yes, but isn't that young for their people?
It's a good question. Which by the way then gets later on remarked in the Force. Oh, I'm sorry. I think The Rise of Skywalker, where they're like, "Oh yeah, you're old." Like Finn and Poe make some comments about it, which was not an intentional segue to next week. I'm just saying, Chewbacca's age gets mentioned.
Yeah, which is weird because I think, what did we figure out? That one's only like 30, 35 years after Last Jedi. Right? Not Last Jedi, sorry.
Or Last
Return of the Jedi. They messed me, like, when I was a kid, I knew these as Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi. That's how we referred to them. And thank you for, they just had to have that one called The Last Jedi, which was like, no, now I have two with the name Jedi. So yeah, I think it's like 35 years after Return of the Jedi.
You mean before? Which one?
Rise of Skywalker, because we were curious because, Luke and Leia are supposed to be like 19 in A New Hope.
Yeah.
And so on the Wikipedia, they claim that, what's his name? Kylo is like 30 in The Force Awakens.
Okay.
Which we were like, that seems odd timeline wise, but that's what they have the character profile at.
He's 30?
Rey is younger.
Right. Rey is like 19 or 20. I think Finn's like 23. Rey's 19.
I thought she was like.
Someone want to
22.
look up how? I mean, I can trust you. Kylo's 30ish.
Well,
Yeah, well, they're all
Kylo's
gonna-
30 when he dies. Basically, he's 30 when he dies.
Oh, okay.
So there's a couple years there, but he's still pushing 30 when the first movie starts. They don't drag out over too many years. So even when the first movie starts, he's 30 because it says he's born 5 ABY and died 35 ABY. So he was exactly 30.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Poe's like 28, maybe at TFA. Finn's 23, and 18 or 19 is Rey. Something like that.
I just think it's odd to have Kylo be 30. It just doesn't.
Yeah, so Kylo's born 5 ABY. She's born 15. So she's 10 years younger than he is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then she's 20 at the end of the Skywalker Saga series.
T-Roz, yeah.
See, I think they had to make Kylo as old as they did because they wouldn't have had a good explanation for why Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill look like they're in their 60s.
And Harrison Ford.
Well, he looked old in the original ones, but they physically look like they're in their 60s, and yet if they're 19 in the first set, they're not more than like 55, and yet they look like they're mid 60s and older, which I think I saw Mark Hamill actually like 70. So I have a feeling they were like, yeah, let's just make Kylo fit that.
Yeah, could be. All right, so Rise of Skywalker next week. It's our 12th out of 12. Very exciting. If you have, yeah, I know Vera's excited. If you have any suggestions, comments, questions, queries, whatever, if you have ideas. But yeah, we've made it this far.
We're not at the end yet, but I was just kind of thinking,
Yeah,
I think The Mandalorian's only like 10 episodes.
it's 8. It's 8 episodes.
8, even less.
It's doable. Yeah.
Nafi
probably-
would like Mandalorian, right, Nafi?
Yeah. And I'm even wearing the Star Wars shirt because today was a Star Wars marathon. And today I even played with Star Wars toys. And I went to Grandma's house and played the Star Wars toy. Still.
I'll put myself back on mute. Sorry.
That's all right. I'll think about it. I could probably go through. I mean, it's funny because there's such little dialogue in The Mandalorian.
Right. I was going to say you'd have to do like 2 episodes per session because there is so much less dialogue.
I was going to do the first season one fell swoop.
And
It's really not that much dialogue. It's really
they're
not that
shorter. So yeah. No, I don't know.
much. Yeah.
I would also say Clone Wars, but it's so long. I don't know if you could ever get through it.
Yeah, so that's the really fascinating thing. I mean, really, it's possible even to literally just focus on the opening wisdom statements, the fortune cookie statements at the very beginning of all episodes, and like forget it. I mean, there's so much content in all the episodes. I mean, that's so much
And
runtime.
Star Wars Rebels.
Yeah, Star Wars.
Rebels, you could have some good stuff, especially what Kanan teaches Ezra and stuff along those lines.
And Bendu, and yes.
I am the light. I am the dark. I am the
So, All right, I'll consider
Yeah, I
doing a
give my children
special.
a well-rounded education.
Yeah, I'll consider doing a special Mandalorian episode. That would be fun. That'd be fun. But yeah, until then, next week we got Rise of Skywalker. So awesome. All right, well, thank you everybody. I hope you have a great coronavirus week. Hopefully everybody stays corona-free and all that good stuff. What?
What's with the coronavirus?
Just
I mean, aside from the fact it's around, but you never mentioned it before.